the Hollywood in general, man. I mean, that's kind of what the name of the segment that I put on there is Hollywood is dead, just because it feels like sure we have those Marvel movies as an example of they're okay, but then not all of them are necessarily okay. Now, like you have Black Widow. Now I haven't seen it yet, but there's all this controversy about it because now suddenly it's sexist for her to be a Black Widow. That actually the whole thing that they do is to seduce men to get information from them. That was kind of like, or Scarlet. Or wait, no, was it Black Widow? It is Black Widow, right? Am I thinking the
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's now Disney dropped her because she's suing Disney. That's a whole thing that's going on. But this whole woke Hollywood culture. I mean, you are an actor. I'm sure that you see it more than anyone else in the industry.
Well, it's very difficult, and for the longest time, I tried to think about how really it's been difficult for me to summarize, just in terms of just how my race has impacted my career. I mean, I'm one of these people who thinks that terms like Black actor are really annoying because sort of like white rapper or strong woman,
Yeah.
like the presumptions or presuppositions underneath the phrase really irk me.
Yeah.
But
understandably so.
But there's a weird thing that's happening right now where it used to be we would complain about, if you go back to movies from the 80s like Hollywood Shuffle, they really satirize this stuff. It's really, really great if you haven't seen it. But the complaint was that the only Black people that you see, especially Black men, in Hollywood and on film, with some exceptions, we're playing drug dealers and criminals and yada, yada, yada. But now there's this weird thing happening where ironically, because they're trying to be inclusive as possible, they're also making things as safe as possible.
Okay.
And I think that or you're sort of forced to become a mouthpiece for what's essentially progressive, Marxist or postmodernist, however you want to term it or label it, propaganda. Prime example, I got an audition recently. My manager, she's a fantastic person and really great at her job. But she sent me this audition for a long-running network procedural that airs every week. I call it one of the Dick Wolves, one of the Dick Wolf shows, like a la Law and Order, yada yada yada. And I was like, oh great, this person is a doctor. He's educated, intelligent, and empathetic. This role is right up my alley. And I'm reading it and I'm really digging it. I'm digging it. I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to put myself on tape for this and put some work into it for the preparation of it. But then I got to the last page and it talks about how, just to be vague, but somewhat specific, it talks about like medical disparities between Black and white people and how Black people are suffering from these disparities specifically because they are Black. And that's just it. Wow. And when I read that, my heart just kind of sank, because I said, here's somebody who, in the scene, he's talking to a kid who is a young boy who is in a gang, and he got injured, and he's treating this kid who's in the gang.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, here's a great character who is trying to help out this at-risk youth. And but then this white female character comes in, and she becomes the problem. Not that this kid has joined. The gang is like part of the problem, but then it becomes that she's ignorant to the quote unquote whatever the means, a Black experience, as if there's one unified Black experience.
Right.
And, I'm just kind of sick of this stuff. Or just as a man, there's so many scripts now, and as much as it bothers people with Hollywood, I would say it's even 10 times more concentrated in the New York theater scene, which dictates what happens with the rest of the country. And a lot of stuff comes out of there that ends up, ending up in Hollywood. But it's this idea that, I was on a Zoom call for a play reading that we were doing online. And one of the lead actors was talking about his family, and he has all daughters, I guess. And he said, he goes, yep, I have all daughters. I don't create any useless humans. And everyone started laughing. And I just said to myself, like, this pervasive attitude of anything male, anything masculine, even existing as is wrong, and you spend years and years kind of biting your tongue, because it becomes clear that the dominant. I mean, there was one show that I was doing that was set in 1947, during World War II, and
That sounds cool.
I brought up the point that we have men and women in the workplace, and a big part of this particular show, which is why I was excited to do it, was the intermingling of sex and danger in this show.
Okay.
And I said, well, you as an actor, you have discussions. I mean, I think way fewer people would want to be actors if they knew how tedious it often can be. But,
Yeah.
but we're talking about the story and how to set the scene, and for the audience, and what kind of world we're trying to create. And I made the point that, well, we have men and women integrated in the workplace at this particular time, and maybe they don't know. It's sort of a Petersonian point, if I may say so, that you have men and women working together in a close environment for the first time, maybe forever. So how do we as human beings negotiate those rules in a society where we were perhaps more separated before? And it became like, women have been in the workplace, especially Black women. And I'm like, that's not even the point I was making, you dumbass. I'm talking about how. I'm trying to throw out ideas of things that we can use as actors to fuel our performances in this scene about it, or maybe inform the rest of the play about how men and women are interacting in this story that has sex and danger and violence at the very core of it. And maybe that can be useful. I mean, maybe your listeners agree. Does that sound useful? If you want to explore that, to try to find some kind of exciting moments for an audience, the tension that might exist between men and women who haven't really been working together before. It's that kind of a thing. Very practical, very sort of down to earth and grounded in sort of human impulses. But it became this whole. I mean, that first week of rehearsal, I realized, like, oh man, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be the men are bad and women good show, and whatever input I have to offer that might shift some kind of accountability or blame or paint women in a negative light, that will be shot down. The director was talking about maybe cutting some lines, even some really great lines. There's one line where one of the characters says, he's like, women is the craziest people I ever met. And that line always got a laugh every night. But the director was like, I'm thinking about cutting that for a variety of reasons, because it's offensive. And it's like, dude, the audience gets it. That's why they're laughing. That's why it's a funny line. Because I mean, how many guys have said that? How many guys feel that way? It doesn't mean we don't love you or don't want you or whatever. It's just, that's just part of the human condition. It's the tension that we live among. And I
think that nails it right there. Actually, what he's saying and what it's proving, the entire industry, they don't want the audience to care about it. They want to teach the audience. You need to learn these lessons because society is wrong. You're wrong for believing what you want to believe. This is how it should be. Instead of like that line, people were laughing because they can emphasize with it. They can connect to it. Suddenly they have a little bit more of a connection to what's going on. And then they're more intrigued to follow along more instead of being told, you're wrong for however you feel. We got to cut all these little lines just to make sure that we're teaching people instead of showing them something that they can connect to.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the whole thing. It's all about connecting and finding, I had a wonderful teacher named Zelda Fitchandler, may she rest in peace. And she really changed my life in a lot of positive ways. But she once told me, the more, like we say right now, like the personal is political, but she would say that the personal is universal, i.e. the more personal something is, the more universal it becomes. And I discovered this when I wrote a one-man show where I was talking about it. It was wrapped around these themes of my own sort of feelings of loneliness, disconnection, and feeling detached. And I had so many people from so many walks of life coming up to me saying, like, I can relate to what you were talking about. And that's when I began to understand it. There are just certain experiences about being a human being that are universal, that everyone's going to get, even if they don't have your exact experience. And the more that we stray away from that, the more that the goal becomes I keep referencing this essay by Albert Maltz in 1946 called "What Shall We Ask of Writers," and this is a left-wing writer, Albert Maltz, who was assailing left-wing artistry and criticism. And they're writing these shallow political leaflets. They're using art as a weapon, is what he calls it, and they're writing stuff to appease their peers, essentially, and to appease the politics that of the moment that cater to their own sort of ideology and agenda. And what that does is that it blunts the force of whatever the work might be, and it's no longer audience focused after that point. It's no longer about creating an emotional experience and an emotional journey for the audience.
Connection. Yep.
Yeah, and that's kind of the magic of it all. I mean, I know people think it's theater or it's just the movies. Who cares? But there is something to be said about the communal experience of sitting in a room together or gathering in a park. They screened the movie Airplane, which is one of the funniest movies ever made.
Great movie.
Some years ago in Central Park, and there were about 500 people there. And even though that movie was made, I want to say in 79 or 1980. And there's so much in that film you would never be able to get away with today.
Sure.
All the jokes still landed, and to see this audience of hundreds of strangers all responding in the same way to what's going on screen, and having this collective experience, dare I say the word collective,
right?
This sort of experience together. I think it's a really sort of powerful thing, and but now in New York City is trying to actively discourage any sort of community experience at that point.
Well, we'll get to that in a second.
Oh boy.
But before we do, it's just onto this point, it does feel like people are thirsty for that kind of connection, that kind of raw entertainment, right? Something that they can connect to, that doesn't shove things down your throat, that doesn't just automatically assume you need to be taught a lesson, that, we're not kids anymore. We're not watching cartoons. We're adults that, can handle real life, because, hey, newsflash, we live in it every day. We see what we see. We don't need to be told this BS virtuous, ideology that they're trying to shove, So I feel like we're on the verge of that bubble popping, like that woke mob takeover, because they've been screeching the loudest. But money talks, and movies are bombing because they're trying so hard to, go down this path, and they stopped caring about the audience. They really don't care about the connection. They just want the butts in the seat. They're just like, look at He-Man, it's like they said, it's totally going to be He-Man. It's not going to be She-Ra or whatever her name is. I don't remember. It's a whole mess, but they killed him in the first episode, and it became about a woman like taking over and being the powerful character instead. And everyone's like, come on, we're so sick of this. And they want real.
Well, and the irony is that Tila,
there it is.
If the story had become like He-Man dies, that could have been a very shocking plot point,
right?
And and if she had learned about the Adam's identity, and like watching her kind of deal with like insecurity, and if she's all of a sudden given all of these responsibilities and this image to live up to in Prince Adam's absence and He-Man's absence, I think a lot of people will go along with that story and say, oh wow, let's see how Tila grows throughout all of this,
right? Let's
see what kind of a hero or heroine she will be. How will she fill that void in Adam's absence? And I think a lot of people would have really been intrigued by that. Instead, I saw some of the promotional material about it, and I think one of the ironies is that Sarah Michelle Gellar, I think, who voices Tila, who is a star of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is a beloved show. I've never seen it, but everyone who talks about it has just adored it. It became this idea of powerful women, essentially. And there's a whole other kind of rabbit hole to go down about how these quote unquote powerful women just kind of seem like mediocre versions of men, or that they're trying to emulate sort of caricatured, classical but caricatured male traits, like brute strength and aggression,
big shoulders.
Big shoulders, lots of military presses or whatever.
Yeah.
But but then the question becomes, and I've had close female friends ask this of me, well, what about being a woman? What about what is
Yes.
unique and powerful about the feminine? What can be explored in that? There's tons and tons of dramatic material um, to be found, to be mined,
Yeah.
in those kinds of questions. And then and how does that clash with men and masculinity and all this? I mean, some of the great stories have been about that. I mean, Shakespeare, Mark Antony and Cleopatra. It's such a great story. I love I love it because you have one of the most powerful men in the world, this general,
Yep.
this but he is completely wrapped around the finger of this woman, Cleopatra, and a lot of tragedy ensues because of that. And or the Macbeths, Lady M, the
Yep.
wife of the title character, the way she manipulates him, and she questions his manhood, his masculinity. I mean, she has a whole monologue on stage by herself early in the play where she's saying, "Unsex me here. If I were a man, I would do this. Oh God, that I were a man, I would do this and that." And and she's very frustrated. And what she ends up doing is she goes to her husband, like, you're not going to kill the king. What are you, are you not a man?
Mm.
You were a coward. And he ends up, because he has a conscience, he gets attacked, but then he ends up by the end of the scene agreeing to do it. And then, the tragedy ensues, but then she ends up killing herself late in the play. She can't handle the burden of what she's done, of
Yeah.
what she's caused. So there's interesting stories like that you can tell that really encompass certain truths about men and women and relationships and and this play was written hundreds of years ago, by the way,
Yeah. Yeah.
hundreds
Yeah.
of years ago. And back at a time when authors could still, were more interested in serving as mirrors to society and to humanity, as opposed to, like I said before, trying to use art as a weapon to forward some kind of message, or basically using art as a tool for social engineering, which I think people are really kind of getting hip to and getting tired of.
I
And
think
like,
that's the problem with He-Man, though. They didn't. That's not how they marketed it. They marketed it as like He-Man's coming back, and all those people who like He-Man was their beloved childhood. Like I had the He-Man sword as a kid. Like I
oh yeah,
ran around swinging that thing, and it made noises anytime you hit it, and you had a button. And it's like I have the power. It was
I
awesome. I
have the
loved it.
power. Yes,
It was
sir.
great, and that's not what they marketed it as. They said if they had said we're bringing it back, it's not going to be what you remember. We're using, we're going to shake the story up, and like you said, if they had done it appropriately and said like this is not what you expect, it's going to be her. She's going to have to deal with people who've been pissed, but they were lied to and they got annoyed, and that's what they were angry at. And then like you said earlier, if they go against it, which most of the fans hate Kevin Smith now, they're like, you betrayed us, you lied to us. And they're like, what are you, you're misogynistic men now, huh? Toxic men, because you're mad that the woman is like the main character. And it's like, no, we're not. We're mad because you ruined the IP. You killed He-Man off, and you marketed it to us as though it was going to be this epic return of He-Man, the show that we all loved. You used us. You used the IP that we loved to shove down that ideology that like, and of course the woman in the show. So I haven't seen it myself, but what I hear is she's awfully masculine and she's taking the man's place, and it's like we have two. There's a men and female. Like do the female traits. Like shine a light on a strong female character. There's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't have been upset about that. I don't
and,
think people would have been.
and by the way, we talk about strong women, or strong characters,
Mm-hmm.
but the reality is that oftentimes we go to see, if we go to the theater or we go to the cinema, we connect with characters who are flawed, and characters who have weaknesses, and characters
Yeah.
that display what those are. And then part of a great story is they struggle to overcome those weaknesses or work against them,
Tony
um,
Stark, for
or
example.
eradicate them. And that's exactly, yeah, exactly. And I was talking to another artist, a guy named Cecil, excuse me, I'm not British, but Cecil Charles, about this. And we kind of talked about how a story is a struggle. And it's there's two any great drama, there's great conflict at the center of it, and there's two
Yeah.
opposing forces that conflict with one another, and the effectiveness and the power of a story or a piece of drama, a piece of fiction, how does that conflict resolve, and what is the impact on the audience of that? What is the fulfillment of the promise set forth by the story initially? And if you're promising to tell this great story about He-Man, and you don't fulfill that promise, then people are going to be upset. And I think one of the things that also irritates me is that, and one of the reasons I began to really become more vocal is that, you can't, the way that people are denigrating these audiences, it speaks to a larger issue, which is that you have a cluster of people, and Thomas Sowell writes about this brilliantly. He's been doing it for decades. He talks about the vision of the anointed, the people who call themselves the anointed, or those who have the unconstrained vision of life. And these are people who believe, because they've gone through all these avenues, they've gone through these elite institutions, they've checked all the right boxes.
Yeah.
They think that they are the ones who are, as the experts, and all of this talent and intellectual ability is concentrated in the hands of a few to disperse to the many, and the many are those who are uneducated. They're the masses who are stupid. They're not as morally correct. And I think one of the reasons that things are kind of falling apart now, and why the bubble will burst soon, and I was talking about this to some colleagues the other day, is that in the era of something like YouTube, and in the era of social media,
Yep.
where we now have access to these not only normal people, but also to these celebrities. And what we're learning is that, unlike in the past, where celebrities had very, very carefully cultivated public images, there were people that were hired to control those images in the studio system in Hollywood. They had people cleaning up the actors' messes. They kept getting themselves into trouble, but they had to ensure it wouldn't reach the papers and cause any kind of upset with their fan bases. But now we have 24/7 access to what these people, these famous people, these actors, these celebrities really think. And what we're learning is that they're really not that smart, and they're really not that interesting. They're not as interesting as listening to some random
Thomas Sowell.
you can.
I'll take him any day over
exactly,
any celeb.
Exactly, but not even just Thomas Sowell. I mean, you have people who are sitting, just in their bathrobes, providing political commentary, or you have people who.
Okay.
I mean, one of my favorite examples is there's a guy, I can't remember his name, but I mean, his YouTube channel it's videos of him with rats. I mean, not rats, but chasing rats with trained dogs and one other kind of rodent, maybe ferrets. I don't know what it is.
What?
But his videos have like tens of millions of views, and I watch them. I'm watching them like, I did not know I needed to see this dude running around like catching rats. It's all kind of. But that's that guy's passion. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying, is that guy's passion is doing this particular thing, and it's really interesting to watch. And what people are doing now is they're migrating more and more towards these interesting niche personalities and people, and they're migrating away from these really uninteresting and kind of boring conformist celebrities. So the whole era of the movie star, I think, is quite over. What it means to be famous, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean what it used to be. You can be a movie star, whatever that means, but at the same time, you could also start a podcast and have way more reach and influence. You can get famous off of a tweet.
That's true. That's true.
So,
yeah.
It's way decentralized now. Well, exactly. I mean, and I think people are seeing what guys like Tim are doing. They're seeing what guys like Joe Rogan are doing. They're seeing the impact guys like Jordan Peterson have.
Yep.
And people are saying to themselves, well, wait a minute. I don't really care about this particular actor's stupid opinions about socialism.
Right.
They clearly don't know what they're talking about. But here's a person who has a YouTube channel that actually lived under a socialist regime, and they're telling me about it. It's that kind of stuff that says to me, like, look, the game has to change. And I think where the change is going is it's going to go into the hands of independent content creators, as opposed to this big overarching studio system, and it's probably a better thing than not.
I agree 100%.